to generate a lot of attention because of the promise of the new technology. And there were major issues with that. One is they were eliminating a lot of the smaller species which poor people have consumed. And it also meant that water bodies were becoming privatized because it now had greater value. So in the process of technology adoption, a lot of the poor people were losing out. Foundation's programs were meant to address a lot of these rural poverty development related issues. And in the context of Bangladesh, you could not talk about rural development without considering fisheries resources available to the communities. I went on, talked to a lot of the potential partners, explored the situation within the donor community, and then looking at the numbers, basic research, and asking what would the foundation be able to contribute to this whole mix if there are already a lot of institutional players out there. And also just reality check, because sometimes it is very easy to imagine problems or issues where perhaps they might not necessarily exist. And my answer was yes, because basically they were missing the major aspect of fisheries management, which was the most important and which nobody was talking about. But when I first started, I didn't know where it was going to end up going. The basic question was always very clear. How do you get this important resource in the hands of poor people who need them most? That was very clear. The considerations were also very clear. Considerations of equity, considerations of empowerment for this group, a policy environment that is more supportive of their management. There were also concerns about the environmental implications of any types of fisheries management strategy. What was not clear was how do you then begin to address all of these issues together. Of course, the program staff has to do a lot of initial thinking. In many cases, you have to argue your way so that people eventually consider the idea and then give it serious thought, either for or against. And in the process of back and forth, if you're reasonably open and if people know that you're genuinely interested in the outcomes, not necessarily fully vested, then what you get is a more realistic picture of what is achievable, what is doable, given the context. So what you end up with is a germ of an idea that is, a shared idea. And if you approach it systematically, thinking about the process, one step at a time, identifying what areas need to be covered, and then linking them up with a larger process that involves other institutions as well. And identifying which individuals or which institutions share the belief, the direction, the concerns that the initiative is working towards. It's very important to first figure out where institutions are in their own developmental process so that one does not drive them in directions where they are not inclined to go in the first place. And because with the initiative, you don't necessarily have individuals thinking of the same long-term pathway, as well as they would not necessarily have exactly the same vision, but they do go in the same general direction. So it's a self-selection process. Those who stay are those who actually feel that it's well worth staying. We work on various levels. One is at the community level, where we were testing alternative ways of bringing the community into the fisheries management process, either through the introduction of technology, through linkages with credit, for example, capacity building, leadership training, empowerment approaches, etc., and see how that would play out in a particular location. We started with a number of NGOs, the well-established NGOs, because we did not want to risk an experiment with very small NGOs which do not have the capacity to bear that risk. But having gone through the first cycle, we started bringing in new NGOs with small grants, and then having the expertise or the technical assistance provided by the larger, more experienced institutions in the initiative. Proshika, for example, start with a very strong training empowerment component as their entry point, There are others that tend to work more in terms of the asset creation, providing the capacity for these communities to save and invest together. So it's really a matter of emphasis. Some are emphasizing one more than the other. The government's Department of Fisheries is a key player because they set the policies for fisheries management in the country. The other is ICLARM, the International Center for Living Aquatic Resources Management. They are an international research center, also doing research on aquaculture technology. At the same time, they were working on rural development focus. So they were a natural partner in terms of the excellence. We did not have the legal part covered when we first started. Through a grant from the Ford Foundation, we started an organization called the Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association. Once they got up and running, we said that, well, there is a very important issue here on fisheries legislation. Would you be willing to look at it? And of course, they said this is very interesting, and so they got on board. FEMCOM was brought in for the communications part of it. FEMCOM would cover a lot of the major events and highlights and get the product out to the television media to reach the middle class consumers of fish, to policymakers and various audiences. And so we started with these core institutions with the potential for transferring learning elsewhere.